BTK, Bind, Torture, Kill Part 1, Seeds of Darkness Prologue, a quiet American town Wichita, Kansas. A place where the wind moves gently across open fields, where the sun rises over endless plains, and where people used to say nothing truly terrible ever happens. Families lived in modest homes with trimmed lawns. Children played in the streets, and neighbors trusted one another so deeply that doors were left unlocked at night. Wichita was a portrait of American calmness, simple, predictable, safe, but behind closed curtains, and beneath the surface of everyday life, something ancient and monstrous was beginning to crawl to the surface. Not a shadow lurking in alleyways. Not a drifter passing through town. The real horror lived among them, mowing his lawn, waving to neighbors, reading the Bible in church every Sunday morning. His name was Dennis Lynn Rader, and for more than 3 decades, he would become one of the most terrifying predators the United States had ever faced. Chapter 1: The Cold Birth of a Quiet Storm. Dennis Lynn Rader entered the world on March 9, 1945, in the small town of Pittsburgh, Kansas. From the outside, his childhood seemed typical, a blue-collar family in a quiet Midwestern town. His father worked long hours for the electric company. His mother balanced shifts while trying to raise 4 boys, but young Dennis always felt invisible. His parents were strict and distant, emotionally unavailable, often exhausted. His father, a man of few words, would return home from work, eat, and fall asleep in his chair. There was no warmth, no affection, no reassuring hand on the shoulder. Dennis grew up craving attention he never received, a hunger that would twist inside him, seeking satisfaction in darker ways. Even as a child, Dennis knew he wasn't like the other boys. When others ran outside to play baseball, he wandered into quiet places alone. When others caught insects, he tied them to strings or pinned them to wood. He discovered something about himself. Power excited him. At age 8, Dennis began tying up animals, small cats, dogs, rabbits. He enjoyed the helplessness in their eyes, the struggle, the moment when life slipped away. He didn't know the word for it yet, but the feeling was intoxicating, total control. He also began fantasizing about tying up people, women, specifically. He was fascinated with women in distress, imagining them bound, gagged, completely dependent on him. This was his secret world, built in silence. To everyone else, Dennis was a shy, awkward boy. To himself, he was something more, a god in his fantasies. Chapter 2: The mask begins to form. By the time Dennis reached his teenage years, he had learned something important. If he wanted to survive in the world, he needed a mask. He discovered that society rewarded normalcy, politeness, reliability. So he became those things. In school, he wasn't popular. He wasn't charismatic. But he was quiet, responsible, obedient, the kind of boy teachers appreciate because he never causes trouble. What no one knew was that inside his head, Dennis was building entire worlds, mental movies where he stalked, captured, tied, tortured, and controlled women. These elaborate fantasies became part of his daily existence. While sitting in class, while walking home, while lying in bed at night, his outward personality and inner reality were splitting apart. He felt the distance growing. He secretly liked it. By 14, he was sneaking into people's backyards, peering through windows. He memorized the routines of women who lived nearby. He tested locks, he studied houses, he learned how to move without making noise. He discovered something vital: he loved the preparation just as much as the act itself. As he later said, "I lived in a fantasy world. I planned things in my head for years before I did them." Chapter 3: The Air Force and the First Taste of Control. After high school, Dennis joined the U.S. Air Force. The military gave him structure, discipline, purpose, and something else: confidence. Traveling abroad, learning about procedures, following orders, all of this strengthened his ability to lead a double life. He learned how to act, how to blend in, how to obey rules while secretly bending them inside his mind. During his time in the Air Force, Dennis kept his fantasies alive. He broke into storage rooms, stole underwear, tied knots into ropes, and imagined the women who would wear those clothes. He also learned about security systems, keys, tools, and techniques that would later help him commit crimes with terrifying precision. But outwardly, he was a good soldier. He received praise for his discipline, his superiors trusted him, his peers liked him. The mask was almost perfect. When Dennis returned home and married a woman named Paula, everyone saw a man who had grown into a responsible adult. A man ready to start a family. A man building a future. What no one saw was that his fantasies were growing darker, and they demanded to be satisfied. Chapter 4, A Normal Life. A very normal life in the 1970s, Dennis settled in Wichita, Kansas, a quiet, peaceful city. He lived in a modest home, got a job at a security company, and later as a compliance officer. He joined the Christ Lutheran Church and quickly became one of its most respected members. Neighbors saw him as a family man, church members saw him as a leader, co-workers saw him as diligent and organized. No one saw the other side, the side that collected bondage magazines, created secret codes, wrote violent fantasies, and sketched detailed plans for murders he had not yet committed. He built projects in his mind, choosing women, studying their routines, imagining breaking into their homes. He watched them. He waited. He planned. He fantasized, and then, in 1974, something inside him snapped. His fantasies demanded reality. Chapter 5, Project Otero. On the cold morning of January 15, 1974, Dennis Rader walked through the quiet streets of Wichita toward the home of the Otero family. He had been watching the house for weeks. He knew the father left early for work. He knew the mother stayed home. He knew 2 children would be there. He believed he had full control. He knocked on the door. What he didn't expect was that the father had not left for work that day. He was inside. A normal man might have left immediately. BTK did not. Rader pulled out a gun. He forced the family into submission. He lied, telling them he only wanted money and a car. He bound them. He tortured them. The Otero family, mother, father, and 2 children, died within their home, one by one, in a scene so brutal that it scarred Wichita for decades. Later, when recounting the moment, Rader spoke of it with chilling detachment. They were a problem. I had to deal with them. To him, they weren't people, they were a project. A long-awaited scenario brought to life, and as he walked away from the scene, leaving 4 bodies behind, he felt something he hadn't felt before: relief, power, satisfaction. His fantasies had finally become real. Chapter 6, BTK is born. After the Otero murders, Wichita was paralyzed with fear. Police had no leads. No motive. No suspect. The case chilled everyone who learned about it, but for Dennis, the silence was infuriating. He wanted recognition. He wanted a name. He believed killers should be famous, should be feared, should be admired for their intelligence. So in October 1974, he sent a letter to a local newspaper. Inside were details about the Otero murders that only the killer could know, and at the bottom of the letter, he wrote, "I am BTK. Bind them, torture them, kill them." A name that would become synonymous with terror. With this letter, Dennis Rader stepped fully into his second identity, no longer just Dennis the husband, the church leader, the neighbor, but BTK, the monster he had always been inside. It was the beginning of a reign of fear that would last over 30 years. Part 2, The City of Fear. Chapter 7, A Killer Who Needed an Audience. After the Otero murders, Wichita breathed anxiety instead of air. Families bought guns for the first time. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts. Women avoided walking alone even in daylight. The fear was contagious, silent, invisible, everywhere. But BTK enjoyed every second of it. He read newspapers obsessively, circling articles about the murders. He listened to radio coverage and watched news anchors struggle to describe the brutality of the crime. He fed on their confusion. He fed on the panic. He fed on the city's fear, but something bothered him. They didn't know his name yet. His work wasn't being recognized properly. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be admired, in the way a predator admires itself. He wanted the world to know that Wichita had a monster, and that monster had a signature. So he wrote letters, taunting the police, mocking the public, describing in disturbing detail how he had tied, tortured, and killed the Otero family. The handwriting was neat, controlled, almost elegant. The sentences structured. The tone calm. In one letter he wrote, "It's time for the hunt to begin again. The monster inside me must come out." He was no longer Dennis Rader. He was no longer human. He was BTK, a name he crafted carefully, like a brand he wanted to last forever, and inside him, the hunger was growing again. Chapter 8, The first cycle begins. After the Otero murders, BTK waited, not because he was scared, because killing, for him, was a ritual. It required preparation, study, imagination. He called these rituals projects. He selected women based on a feeling, sometimes a passing glimpse when driving by, sometimes noticing a woman walking from her car to her house, sometimes spotting someone at a grocery store. He took notes. He drew sketches. He visited their homes when they weren't there, studying windows, doors, patterns. He stalked them silently at night, wearing dark clothes and gloves, pretending to be invisible, though in truth, he loved the fantasy of being unseen. He created elaborate binders, filled with meticulous details: where they lived, how they parked their car, what time they left the house, what time they returned, where the nearest phone was, how many locks were on the door, which windows were easy to access, what kind of curtains they had, whether they lived alone, how often they checked their surroundings. Each project was like a story in his mind, one where he was the mastermind, the architect, the director of the horror. But not every project succeeded. Sometimes the woman wasn't alone, sometimes she had a visitor, sometimes something unexpected happened. When something disrupted the plan, BTK felt insulted. He hated losing control. He hated when his fantasies didn't match reality, but he always found another target, and in April 1974, he found one. Chapter 9, Project Catherine Bright. Catherine Bright was a 21-year-old college student, smart, kind, quiet. She lived in a small home near Wichita State University. A normal house on a normal street. Nothing about it warned of danger. BTK had watched her for weeks. He knew her routine. He knew when she came home. He knew she lived with her brother part-time, but he assumed he wouldn't be there that day. He was wrong. When Rader broke in and waited inside her home on April 4, 1974, he expected one victim. Instead, two people walked in, Catherine and her brother, Kevin. What followed was chaos, the kind BTK despised. He demanded control, and the scene was slipping away from him. Rader pulled out a gun. He forced both siblings to the floor. He tried to bind Kevin, but Kevin fought back. Not many people fought BTK and lived. Kevin Bright was one of the few. During the struggle, Rader shot Kevin in the head. The noise was deafening in the small house. Kevin collapsed, and Rader believed he was dead. Then he turned to Catherine, the real target. He tied her. He stabbed her multiple times. He tried to kill her quietly, methodically, but something unexpected happened again. Kevin woke up, bleeding, disoriented, but alive, and he fought again. BTK panicked, something he almost never did. He shot Kevin again, but Kevin somehow escaped through the back door, leaving a trail of blood. Rader fled the scene. Catherine Bright died from her injuries. Kevin survived. For the first time ever, BTK's mask cracked. He had failed to control the scene. He had failed to kill cleanly. He had left a witness alive. Later, BTK described this moment as a rare failure. He hated himself for it, but it didn't stop him. Nothing could. Chapter 10, The Psychological Spiral. After the Bright attack, BTK felt a dangerous mixture of emotions: anger, that Kevin had escaped and lived; frustration, that Catherine hadn't died exactly the way he imagined; desire, a burning hunger to kill again. But outwardly, life went on. He went to church. He attended family dinners. He sat on the couch next to his wife, watching television and pretending to be a loving husband. Inside, he was replaying the attack over and over, adjusting details, modifying fantasies, punishing himself for the mistakes. Every murderer kills for different reasons. BTK killed for control. He wanted to be the author of every moment, from the knock on the door to the final breath. After the Bright attack, he spent nights driving through Wichita, scanning neighborhoods, looking for his next project. He studied women through windows, imagining entering their houses unnoticed. He wrote detailed journal entries describing how he wished the Bright project had gone. The brother interfered with my plan. It ruined the moment. I will be better next time. I need more study, more preparation. Next time will be perfect. It didn't matter that the entire city was now terrified. It didn't matter that Kevin had described the attacker to police. It didn't matter that detectives were working around the clock. BTK believed he was smarter than all of them, and as years passed with no arrest, his confidence would only grow. Chapter 11, The City Becomes a Hunting Ground. In 1975 and 1976, BTK continued to stalk women. Many of them never knew how close they came to being a victim. Sometimes he entered a home but found a guest unexpectedly present. Sometimes schedules changed. Sometimes a husband came home early. Rader hated unpredictability in others, but he didn't rush. He had patience. Police, meanwhile, were losing hope. There were too few clues. Gathering forensic evidence in the 1970s was extremely limited. No DNA. No digital surveillance cameras. No modern profiling tools. Investigators had one eyewitness, Kevin Bright, but his description wasn't specific enough. Dennis Rader looked like thousands of Midwestern men, white, average height, short hair, glasses, soft voice. He blended in perfectly. For the next 2 years, BTK bided his time. He wrote letters. He rewrote letters he never sent. He created his own personal mythology, drawing sketches of women tied up, designing future crimes like twisted engineering projects. He also became more deeply involved in church, and his reputation as a community man grew stronger. In church meetings, he spoke calmly about faith. In his mind, he fantasized about killing the women sitting in the same room. He could sit across from a woman he was stalking, smile politely, and shake her hand while imagining in full detail how he would tie her, where he would hide her body, how she would beg. The contrast made him feel powerful, invincible. Chapter 12, Project Shirley Vian. On March 17, 1977, BTK found his next victim, Shirley Vian, a 24-year-old mother of 3. The morning started normally. Shirley was sick with the flu, caring for her kids. Her husband was at work. Nothing seemed unusual. Then the phone rang. No one spoke on the other end. That was BTK, testing the line, making sure she was home. Soon after, he knocked on the door. Her children answered. They thought he was a police officer because of his calm demeanor. Rader entered the home and pulled out a gun. He forced the children into a bathroom and blocked the door with furniture, telling them he wasn't going to hurt them. Then he turned to Shirley. What happened next was methodical, terrifying, and efficient. Rader tied her up, gagged her, and killed her with cold precision, standing over her, watching, controlling every detail. The children heard everything through the door when BTK left. He left a traumatized family behind, but he didn't care. For him, this was another successful project. Later he wrote, "She was a challenge. I liked the fear in her eyes." The Wichita police now had 2 more things: children who saw him, at least briefly, a direct phone call linked to the case, but they still had no suspect. Chapter 13, Project Nancy Fox. In December 1977, BTK struck again. Nancy Fox, a 25-year-old woman who worked at a jewelry store, lived alone in a small duplex. Rader had been watching her for months. He knew everything: what time she went to work, what time she came home, when she ate dinner, when she turned off her lights, when she went to bed, and even when she took out her trash. He followed her silently, learning her patterns until they were burned into his mind. On the night of December 8, 1977, he broke into her house, waited for her to return, and attacked. Nancy Fox tried to negotiate. She tried to remain calm. She tried to survive, but BTK had already decided she would be killed. He tied her. He tortured her. He killed her slowly, savoring every second. Then, in a chilling moment of arrogance, he did something he had never done before. He called the police himself. He picked up the phone and told the dispatcher, "You'll find a homicide at 843 South Pershing. Nancy Fox." Then he hung up. The operator later said the voice was calm, almost bored. BTK wanted the world to know he was back. Chapter 14, The letters continue. After the murder of Nancy Fox, BTK sent the police and media another letter. It was filled with poems, sketches, confessions, and taunts. He compared himself to famous serial killers. He rated himself on a scale of artistic excellence. He explained how much he enjoyed binding and controlling. In one passage, he wrote, "How many people do I have to kill to get my name in the paper?" He wanted fame, but he didn't want to be caught. It was a dance, a psychological game. Police psychologists believed BTK was intelligent, organized, egotistical, and driven by sexual fantasies involving control and domination, but none of this brought them closer to catching him. The people of Wichita were suffocating in fear. No one felt safe. Women slept with chairs against their doors. Husbands stayed awake at night holding baseball bats. Neighborhood watches sprang up everywhere. Meanwhile, Dennis Rader was living a peaceful suburban life. He was active in church. He was respected at work. He mowed his lawn every Saturday. He was planning new murder. His mask was still intact. Chapter 15, A break. But not peace. In 1979, BTK attempted another project, but it failed. He targeted a woman named Anna Williams, who lived alone and had the perfect routine for him. He broke into her home, cut her phone line, waited for her to return, but she didn't. She arrived home hours later than usual, which saved her life. BTK left, furious, disappointed, and deeply offended. Later, he mailed her a package with a poem and drawings, saying she had been a very lucky lady. That failure stung him. It wounded his pride. It disrupted his fantasy. This would matter years later, when his ego would ultimately destroy him. Chapter 16, Silence. Between 1979 and 1985, BTK went mostly quiet. He wasn't killing frequently anymore, but not because he felt guilt or fear. He was simply busy. He had children now. He was involved in Boy Scouts. He had responsibilities in his church. He had a job inspecting homes and properties, but his fantasies remained alive, glowing embers waiting for fuel, and in 1985, the fire returned. Part 3, The Return of the Predator. Chapter 17, 1985, the flame reignites. For 6 long years, Wichita believed the nightmare was over. There were no new killings. No new letters. No taunts. No phone calls. Nothing. Some detectives whispered that the killer might be dead. Others theorized he moved to another city. Or was imprisoned for another crime. Or maybe he got tired. But BTK was never tired. He was merely busy living his double life. He had a wife, 2 children, a respected position in his church, and growing authority in the community. He camped with scouts, taught boys how to tie knots, lectured them about responsibility and morality, a chilling irony considering the Nazi practiced at night. But fantasies don't disappear, they simmer, and in April 1985, the simmering became a boil. He selected his next victim, Maureen Hedge, a 53-year-old widow who lived just a few houses away from him. The proximity thrilled him. It was risky, bold, intimate, everything his fantasies craved. He had watched her. He had studied her schedule. He had imagined the scene countless times, and on the night of April 27, 1985, BTK struck again. Chapter 18, Project Hedge. It was a Saturday night. The neighborhood was quiet. Families were settling in for bed. Rader attended a church function earlier that evening, laughing, eating, acting like the perfect Christian man. But under the surface, the storm was growing. He left the event early. He staged his alibi by driving to a park and pretending to be drunk, leaving his car behind. He called a taxi, returned to his neighborhood, and slipped into the darkness. Maureen Hedge was asleep when he broke in. The attack was quick, controlled, efficient, but unlike previous murders, Rader did something new, something terrifyingly personal. He took her body from the house. He removed her from her own bed, wrapped her in sheets, carried her to his car, and drove her to his church. Inside the sanctuary, beneath the cross where he prayed every Sunday, he posed her body, photographed her, arranged her like a macabre doll. He desecrated the symbol of holiness with the darkest act imaginable, not because he believed in Satan or because he hated God. He did it because he wanted to feel untouchable. Later, in interrogation, detectives asked him why he took her to a church. He answered softly, "It was a place I felt safe. A place I knew well." He used God's house as his private torture stage. After he was done, he dumped her body in a remote ditch like trash and returned home. The next morning, he helped his wife make breakfast. His daughter sat at the table. His wife asked how the church event went. Rader smiled politely. No one suspected a thing. Chapter 19, The Murder of Vicki Weggerl. 1986, a year later, BTK killed again. This time targeting Vicki Weggerl, a 28-year-old mother of 2. On September 16, 1986, Rader, posing as a telephone repairman, tricked his way into her home. He carried a briefcase with tools and equipment, all props carefully selected to appear professional. Vicki sensed something was wrong. Her eyes followed his movements. She stayed near the doorway. Tense, Rader attacked quickly, trying to subdue her before she could flee. But Vicki fought fiercely, clawing at him, dragging furniture, knocking over lamps, doing everything she could to stay alive. The struggle left blood smeared on furniture, walls, and carpet. Rader tied her and strangled her. Before leaving, he took photographs, a trademark of his obsession with documenting his crimes. When her husband arrived home minutes later, he found Vicki dying on the floor. She passed away at the hospital. BTK left almost nothing behind. No fingerprints. No fibers. No usable DNA. The case went cold for the next 18 years, until Rader confessed for Vicki's husband. That confession came as a shock. For nearly 2 decades, he had lived under suspicion. Police interrogated him repeatedly, treating him as the primary suspect. BTK did not care. He did not feel guilt. He even bragged about how many times detectives had interviewed the grieving husband. They had no clue. No idea. It was amusing. The cruelty was not just in the murder, it was in the aftermath he created for the victim's family. Chapter 20, Cub Scouts and Killings. By the late 1980s, Dennis Rader was at the height of his double life. He was a respected Boy Scouts troop leader, teaching young boys about survival, leadership, and morality. Parents trusted him with their children. He took scouts camping, helped them learn how to tie knots, taught them wilderness skills he perfected during murders. In pictures from that era, Rader stands smiling, surrounded by children, wearing a uniform with badges of honor. He looked proud, responsible, fatherly. Inside, he was fantasizing about women he wanted to kill. He wasn't killing every week or even every year, but the fantasies were relentless, and he fed them constantly by breaking into houses to explore, stealing underwear, creating trophy boxes of items, sketching scenes of bondage, writing violent scripts, revisiting old crime scenes, cutting out photos of women from magazines, following women in public places. These activities kept the flame burning, but outwardly, he was a model citizen, and Wichita had begun to forget the terror of the 1970s. That forgetting was exactly what he needed. Chapter 21, 1991, the last known kill. On January 19, 1991, Dennis Rader committed what would be, though no one knew it at the time, his final known murder. His victim was Dolores D. Davis, a 62-year-old woman living alone in a quiet rural area outside Wichita. Rader had already stalked her. He had mapped her routines. He even treated her home as a backup project, in case another victim became unavailable. On that night, he left his family at home, telling them he had to handle a scout camp project. Instead, he drove to Dee's home, cut her phone line, and broke in through a glass door. He killed her quietly, methodically, then he placed her body in the trunk of his car and hid it beneath a bridge, where he took pictures and posed her body. He returned days later to move her remains. It was a cold, calculated murder. No panic. No mistakes. Yet, something changed. When Rader later described this murder, detectives sensed something unusual. It felt obligatory, almost mechanical. There was less excitement in his voice, less pride. Life was catching up with him. Work, responsibilities, church duties, family commitments. He was aging. The fantasies were still strong, but reality required more time, more planning, more energy. The killer inside him wasn't dying, but the man was getting tired. Chapter 22, the 13-year silence between 1991 and 2004. BTK disappeared. To the public, it seemed the nightmare was over. To detectives, it was a mystery. Killers don't usually stop, even serial killers who pause due to life circumstances tend to return eventually, but BTK was different, because his identity was not just about killing. It was about power, attention, and legacy. He wanted recognition, and being forgotten was unbearable. During these silent years, Rader lived a full, active life. He got a better job, became president of his church, his children grew up, his neighbors trusted him, conducted inspections for city authorities, gained more influence in his basement. However, he kept his trophies, photographs, drawings, stolen items, written fantasies, even pieces of victims' clothing. He revisited them often, feeding the hunger. By 2004, he could no longer tolerate being forgotten. The silence ended. Chapter 23, 2004, The Awakening of a Monster. In the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders, Wichita media published a retrospective article. It mentioned that BTK was probably dead or had left the area. It implied he wasn't intelligent enough to evade capture for life. For Dennis Rader, this was an insult of the highest order. The city he terrorized for decades had forgotten him. So he broke his silence. He mailed a package to the Wichita Eagle newspaper. Inside was a photocopy of a driver's license belonging to one of his victims, pictures of a crime scene, a letter describing details only the killer could know. The message was clear: BTK was back, and he wanted attention. Chapter 24, The Cat and Mouse Game begins again. Between 2004 and 2005, BTK sent multiple packages, letters, poems, puzzles, and cryptic messages. He left boxes in parks. He hid notes in public places. He mailed packages directly to media outlets. He taunted police with riddles and codes, saying, "Can you catch me? How smart are you?" Detectives worked desperately to trace the packages, but Rader was careful, almost perfect, at hiding his tracks. Except for his ego, his letters were increasingly desperate, almost pleading for attention. This was not the cold, silent killer of the 1970s. This was an aging man who needed validation. He asked police in a letter, "If I send you a floppy disk, can you trace it?" Police replied through a newspaper, "No. It's safe." It wasn't safe. It was a trap. Chapter 25, The Fatal Floppy Disk. On February 16, 2005, BTK sent a purple 1.44 megabytes floppy disk to a local TV station. Digital forensics recovered a single deleted file, a document created by Dennis at Christ Lutheran Church. Detectives Googled the church. The president was Dennis Rader. Surveillance began immediately. Within days, they obtained a DNA sample from Rader's daughter's medical records, matching it to semen found at the Otero crime scene. It was over. After 31 years, BTK had finally exposed himself, all because he wanted to be remembered. Part 4, The Capture of a Phantom. Chapter 26, February 2005, A quiet arrest. For more than 30 years, Dennis Rader had walked among the people of Wichita as if he were untouchable. He waved to neighbors, scolded children for crossing lawns, parked precisely inside the lines of grocery store lots, and went to church every Sunday. He truly believed he was the smartest man in the city, someone too meticulous to ever be caught. But on the morning of February 25, 2005, the illusion shattered. Rader was driving home from work in his black Jeep Cherokee. He stopped at an intersection, the sunlight flashing against his glasses. He didn't notice the unmarked vans following him. He didn't see the dozen officers surrounding the area. When the light turned green, he eased forward. Suddenly, police vehicles boxed him in, guns pointed, officers shouting, doors slamming, boots hitting pavement. The men who had stalked hundreds of victims, who had crept silently into homes, who had watched families through windows, who had written letters mocking the police, now froze behind the wheel of his Jeep. A voice boomed, "Mr. Rader, step out of the vehicle. Put your hands up." He blinked calmly. He opened the door. He raised his hands. Neighbors who later heard the news said it felt surreal, like the arrest of a boring middle-aged man. There was no dramatic fight. No running. No shouting, just quiet defeat. When an officer placed handcuffs on him, Rader said, almost politely, "I guess you have me." The phantom was finally tangible. Chapter 27. Inside the interrogation room, Rader was taken to a small interview room in the Wichita Police Department, a gray, undecorated cell with a single table and 2 chairs. A camera watched from the corner, capturing every twitch of his face. He sat calmly, hands folded, breathing slow and controlled. He looked like a man waiting for a job interview. Detectives entered the room. Gordon Ramsay, Ken Landwehr, and others who had chased BTK for decades. Landwehr, exhausted from decades of unanswered questions, sat across from him. The room fell silent. Then, Landwehr said, "We have your DNA. We know it's you." Rader didn't ask how they got it. He didn't ask what evidence they had. Instead, he nodded, almost relieved, and said, "Okay, let's talk." And he talked for 30 hours. Calmly, politely, precisely, as if he were giving a PowerPoint presentation. He described each murder with the emotional tone of someone recounting a trip to the grocery store. At times, he corrected detectives when they mispronounced a victim's name. He corrected dates. He corrected sequences of events. He was eager to display his mastery. The detectives were stunned, not by the brutality they had imagined worse, but by how ordinary he was. He wasn't charismatic. He wasn't charming. He wasn't a Hannibal Lecter genius. He wasn't a wild madman. He was painfully average. That was the horror. Chapter 28, The Full Confession. 10 murders. Rader confessed to 10 murders in excruciating detail. He referred to victims not by their names, but as targets or projects. The Otero family, 1974, he described how he tied each member of the family, how he experimented with different bindings, how the children cried, how he lost control of the moment, something that upset him deeply. Catherine Bright, 1974, he lamented how her brother's survival ruined the project. He complained about things going wrong. As if he were discussing a failed hobby. Shirley Vian, 1977, he described how he locked her children in the bathroom. He said this calmly, sipping water. Nancy Fox, 1977, his voice became animated when he described this one. This was his favorite project. He even reenacted some motions with his hands. No emotion for the victim, only pride in himself. The long pauses occasionally, while describing a murder, he stopped talking, not because he felt remorse, but because he couldn't find the right technical term for a knot. He would angle his head upward, like he was searching in a mental library. Detectives waited in horror. Maureen Hedge, 1985. He walked them through how he took her to his church. He talked about staging her body under the cross. He described photographing her as a ritual. Detectives had to leave the room more than once. Vicki Wegerle, 1986, he proudly explained how he fooled investigators into suspecting her husband, Dolores D. Davis. 1991, he recounted hiding her under a bridge, discussing her murder as if he were explaining how to fix a lawnmower. Chapter 29, I knew this day would come. During one lull in the confession, Rader folded his hands and calmly said, I knew someday you would come for me. I just didn't expect it like this. Detectives asked if he regretted anything. He thought for a moment, then he said, I regret that I won't be able to live out my fantasy projects. I had many more planned. The room fell silent. This was the true BTK, a man who saw the world as his playground, women as objects, and murder as entertainment. He admitted, without hesitation, that he had been planning at least 7 new murders between 2004 and 2005, including elderly women church members, a woman who lived near his home, a woman he saw at the library. He hadn't chosen them randomly. He had a plan for each. The floppy disk arrest had stopped him just in time. Chapter 30, Building a Monster, BTK's Inner World. Over the course of the interrogation, detectives pieced together the psychological makeup of BTK. Point 1. He saw women as prey. He studied female movements the way a biologist studies an animal species, patterns, habits, weaknesses. Point 2. He created kill kits. He kept bags of tools, ropes, tape, knives, handcuffs, plastic bags, hidden in various places around town. He called them his toys. 3. Murder was theater. He staged scenes. He photographed victims. He drew elaborate sketches of women tied up. His threads of fantasy were interwoven with real life. Point 4. He did not feel emotion like normal people. He described his wedding day, the birth of his children, the funerals he attended, all with flat, muted effect, but when he described murdering a 21-year-old college student, his voice warmed. Point 5. He did not kill out of rage. He killed because it excited him. He killed because it gave him power. He killed because he believed he was superior. BTK wasn't insane. He was a fully self-aware predator. Chapter 31, Am I going home today? After 30 hours of confession, Rader asked detectives a question that stunned them. So, am I going home today? He genuinely believed he might be released. He believed he could confess to 10 murders, to terrorizing a city, to staging bodies in churches, and still be allowed to return to his family. Detective Landwehr stared at him and said coldly, No, Dennis. You're not going anywhere. For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed Rader's face, just a flicker. Chapter 32, The mask shatters at home. When police told his wife, Paula, that her husband was BTK, she collapsed. She refused to believe it. She insisted there must be a mistake. She was allowed to read a portion of his confession, just a small part. She vomited. Then she said, I never want to see him again. His children were devastated. They had loved their father. They had trusted him. He had taught them how to camp, how to read the Bible, how to be good people. Now they realized he had used their scout trips as alibis for murder. His daughter was especially affected. She became desperate, not understanding how the most stable, gentle man in her life could be a monster. When she saw a portion of the interrogation video on the news, she fainted. The facade had finally crumbled. Rader wasn't just arrested. His family, his church, his city lost the illusion of safety. Chapter 33, Wichita's Reaction. Grief, rage, relief. The day BTK was unmasked, Wichita changed. Forever, people flooded the streets, crying, screaming, praying. Some were angry at the police for taking so long. Others were relieved that he hadn't died or escaped, relieved that he was real, human, mortal. The most haunting reactions came from victims' families. Some sobbed quietly, some screamed in rage, some refused to accept it, some felt guilty for surviving. Some wanted to see him executed. One father simply said, Now I know what evil looks like. The city held vigils, church services, and town meetings. Therapists worked overtime. Reporters swarmed the city. It was as if Wichita was awakening from a 30-year nightmare, finally able to breathe again, even though the air tasted bitter. Chapter 34, Solitary Confinement. The end begins after his confession. Rader was transferred to isolation. He was allowed a coda toilet, a Bible, 3 meals a day, 1 hour of exercise in a private cage, no contact with other inmates. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He organized his cell. He folded his clothes. He stacked his books. He wrote letters about his projects. He kept a journal about his meals, rating the prison food. He behaved like BTK had never existed, but behind his stillness, there was a growing realization he was no longer in control, and that terrified him more than anything. Part 5, The Trial of a Hollow Man. Chapter 35, the calm before the storm. After his arrest, Wichita entered a strange twilight state, a blend of closure, grief, and morbid curiosity. For decades, BTK had been nothing but a shadow, a whisper, a nightmare figure whose existence seemed unreal. But now he had a face. He had a name, and soon, he would have a courtroom. Hundreds of reporters from across the world poured into Wichita, hotels filled with journalists, telephoto lenses pointed at courthouse windows, every local news station switched to 24/7 coverage. On the streets outside the courthouse, crowds gathered with signs, "Justice for Nancy, execute BTK. Burn in hell." We remember the Oteros, but Dennis Rader, he sat in his cell calmly preparing for trial, as if he were preparing for a church meeting. He ironed his prison uniform. He wrote notes. He rehearsed what he would say. He combed his hair neatly. He wanted to be in control again. He wanted to steal the spotlight. He wanted the entire world to listen. In his mind, this trial was his stage. Chapter 36, The Courtroom reveals 2 Raiders. On June 27, 2005, the courtroom filled to capacity. Every seat was taken, victims' families, reporters, curious locals, police officers, detectives who spent decades on the case. The air was heavy, tense, electric. Then the doors opened, Dennis Rader walked in, and the room froze. He looked like nothing. A middle-aged man, soft frame, neutral expression, glasses. A pale beige prison uniform. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a substitute teacher. And that, in itself, was terrifying. People expected a beast. Instead, they got a man who looked like he would apologize for bumping into someone at the grocery store. He sat down calmly, hands folded, eyes emotionless. Not a drop of sweat on his forehead. The judge asked him the routine question, "Mr. Rader, how do you plead?" Millions watched the live broadcast. Detectives leaned in. Victims' families held their breath. Rader adjusted his glasses and said, almost cheerfully, "Guilty." Gasps filled the room. Then he continued, "In all 10 counts." And just like that, the true story began. Chapter 37, The 50-Minute Confession. What followed was one of the most surreal courtroom moments in American criminal history. Rader launched into a 50-minute monologue, explaining each murder in calm, methodical detail. He didn't cry. He didn't tremble. He didn't hesitate. He spoke as if giving a church sermon. His tone was polite. He addressed the judge as, "Your Honor," and answered questions with, "Yes, sir," and, "No, sir." His descriptions were clinical. He described binding victims as procedures. He called murders events. He referred to his victims as targets. His memory was disturbing. He recalled every detail, the angle of a rope, the layout of a room, the position of a hand, the type of knot. Even 40 years later, his emotions were wrong. Rader didn't show remorse. He showed pride in his planning, frustration at mistakes, satisfaction at his successful projects. Every time he described losing control of a victim, he frowned in disappointment. Every time he described a smooth kill, he nodded in satisfaction. The judge, stunned, asked, "Mr. Rader, why are you giving this level of detail?" Rader answered, "I wanted everything to be accurate." He wanted the record to reflect his expertise. Chapter 38, The Families Listing. As Rader spoke, families of the victims sat inches away from him. Some cried silently, some clutched each other's hands, some stared at him with hatred so sharp it could cut glass. One father tremblingly whispered, "He's enjoying this." Another mother collapsed and had to be carried out. A young woman, whose mother was murdered, fainted when Rader repeated the details of her last moments. Detectives watching from the back felt physically sick. They had spent decades imagining this monster, and now, hearing him describe the murders like a grocery list made everything worse. Rader did not look at the families when he spoke. He stared straight ahead, into the distance, as though reading from an invisible teleprompter. He showed no guilt. No shame. No humanity, just emptiness. Chapter 39, The Strange Psychology of Dennis Rader. During breaks, criminal psychologists discussed what they had just witnessed. Some believed Rader was a psychopath, others believed he had elements of narcissistic personality disorder, some thought he was a sexual sadist, some believed he was something beyond psychiatry, a hybrid between a predator and a bureaucrat. One psychologist said, "He is terrifying because he is so ordinary. He kills like a machine, not a man." Another said, "BTK is the perfect storm, a man who has no empathy, absolute self-control, and an obsession with domination." The trial exposed more than his crimes. It exposed the architecture of a killer's mind. Chapter 40, Victim impact statements. After Rader finished his long confession, the families were allowed to speak. One by one, they stepped up to the microphone. A mother's voice shaking, "I hope you burn in hell for eternity." A son's voice breaking, "You left me without a mother, you coward." A sister screaming, "You are not a man. You are a disease." One father, pale as paper, stared right at Rader and said, "When you took my daughter, you killed our whole family." Rader didn't cry. He didn't break down, but something changed in his face. A hint of annoyance. A tiny crease of irritation. As if he was thinking, "Why are they talking about their feelings? This is my moment." To the end, everything had to be about him. Chapter 41, The Judge Speaks. Judge Gregory Waller, a calm and reserved man, had presided over countless cases, but this one tested his composure more than any other. Before sentencing, he addressed Rader directly. "Your actions were inhuman. You stole futures, you created terror that lasted decades, you are a predator in the purest sense." Rader looked up, listening politely, like a student in a classroom. Then came the sentence. Chapter 42, 10 life sentences. Kansas did not have the death penalty at the time of the murders. So the judge gave the maximum punishment allowed, 10 consecutive life sentences, not concurrent, consecutive meaning one after the other. A symbolic punishment, a legal way of saying, if you had 10 lives, you would lose all 10. When the sentence was read, the courtroom burst into applause. Victims' families cried, detectives hugged each other, reporters rushed outside to announce the breaking news. Rader simply nodded. No reaction. No regret. He calmly gathered his notes and waited for officers to escort him away. Chapter 43, The Walk of Shame. As Rader was taken from the courtroom, he passed by the families of his victims. Several lunged toward him, screaming through tears, "Coward! Devil! Look at me! Look at me!" He did not turn his head. He stared at the floor, not out of remorse, out of selfishness. He didn't want to see the victims' families because he didn't want them intruding on his fantasy version of events. Later, one detective said, he wasn't ashamed. He was annoyed. He hated losing control. Chapter 44, Life in Prison. The end of BTK. Rader was transferred to El Dorado Correctional Facility, one of the toughest prisons in Kansas. His life there is monotonous, controlled, and stripped of power. He is in solitary confinement 23 hours a day. He eats alone. He exercises alone in a small cage. He has no interaction with other inmates. He cannot attend church services. He cannot lead anyone. He cannot stalk anyone. He cannot kill. The predator is caged. The hunter is deafened, but he still writes letters to true crime fans. He still draws sketches of bondage scenes. He still ranks his murders in terms of efficiency. He still relives his crimes in his imagination. In many ways, his body is imprisoned, but his mind continues killing every day. He once admitted in a letter, "The fantasies are still there, they are all I have left." Chapter 45, The Last Interview. In 2007, author Stephen Michaud was granted a rare interview with Rader. Many expected remorse, many expected reflection. Instead, they witnessed the same coldness, the same arrogance, the same obsession. Rader spent most of the interview discussing how he stalked victims, which ropes he preferred, which knots were most efficient, how he categorized victims, show he prepared kill kits. He talked about murder like a hobbyist describing a collection. When asked why he killed, Rader replied, "I had a monster inside me. I fed it." When asked whether the monster still lived inside him, he answered, "Yes, always." The author later said, "I didn't speak to a human being. I spoke to avoid wearing a man's skin." Chapter 46, The Legacy of BTK. Wichita has healed, slowly, painfully, but the scars remain. Neighborhoods once terrorized still lock their doors at night. Children who grew up hearing whispers about BTK are now adults raising their own children in the same city. The church where Rader served as president still carries the shadow of his crimes. Detectives who hunted him still struggle with nightmares. BTK's legacy is not just murder. It is a lesson. Evil can look normal, evil can wear glasses, evil can shake your hand, evil can mow its lawn, evil can pray in church, evil can hide in your neighborhood for decades. Dennis Rader wanted fame. He wanted to be remembered, and he will be, not as a great criminal mastermind, but as one of the most chilling reminders that the monsters we fear most are often the ones we never notice.